presentation was setting the scene and explaining the history of transitional or post-conflict justice and why it might be relevant to Mexico. So I talked about the emergence of the importance of truth, why truth is important, why it can't be on its own, it has to be connected to other kinds of things like trials, like reparations, like reform measures. And then I talked a little bit about why this matters to Mexico, which is not in a transition that anybody can notice, at least. Some of the ideas are that if you think about justice in ordinary times, the state can do a perfectly good job dealing with criminality and dealing with justice. But that's not what we're looking at here. What we're looking at is justice in extraordinary times. And that's where the ideas of transitional justice do have some applicability to Mexico, where you have so many cases, so little information, so many people wanting to know what happened. You have this very complicated interrelation of the federal state, the local state, army and police, narco-trafficking, other organized crime, and local economic elites, all of whom are playing a role in creating enormous numbers of people who are being killed or being disappeared and are being tortured. That thinking about the idea of justice in extraordinary times may be helpful, both in terms of thinking about the need to not go case by case, the need to look at overall patterns, the need to think about victims of crimes not just as witnesses, but as a political force that needs to act as a political force, and perhaps most importantly, the idea that in extraordinary times, the state can't and isn't expected to solve the problem on its own. That there's a role for the international community to help the state protect its own people. Is first of all the idea that we don't have to create the giant database in order to move forward. I think there is a tendency sometimes on the part of people who work in different organizations to say, oh, well, I've just got my little piece of the universe and I haven't connected it up. And I thought it was very useful to have Patrick say, look, all you need is your little piece of the universe. And then we can connect them all up and try to figure out what's not in the data that you've got. And I think that changes the way people think about what it is they're doing. I also thought that some of the discussion around why is it that doing these kinds of things, thinking about truth-telling, thinking about justice, thinking about not having amnesties results in lower crime, even in countries that are equally poor and equally unequal, was a useful way of thinking about why it makes sense to spend time and resources trying to work on this stuff. Part of what I was trying to say is that it's a multi-pronged issue, that there's not one thing that's going to move this forward. I mean, part of it is how do you change the political discussion, the media discussion? How do you figure out how to work with the judicial authorities so that they don't just change names and they don't just create new institutions, but that they actually figure out how to create units, for example, within a new fiscalia, who are able to do the kind of context creation, sort of looking at patterns, looking at overall ways in which cases connect up to each other. On the side of finding out what happened, being able to take all of these multiple on-the-ground efforts and develop them and understand their importance as local on-the-ground efforts, but then have a way of connecting them so that we can begin to talk about what's going on in a very different way.